Welcome to This Explainer. We're jumping right into the incredible, true story of a man whose very name is basically synonymous with the light bulb moment. We are, of course, talking about Thomas Alva Edison. Now, we're going to explore his life and his legacy today, and let me tell you, his path to becoming this legendary innovator is way more dramatic and honestly way more riddled with total failure than you might think. Let's get into it. So, how exactly does a kid who was deemed addled or mentally confused grow up to be the genius of the century? It's a pretty shocking contrast. Born in Milan, Ohio, back in 1847, young Thomas was what you'd call a late bloomer. He didn't even talk until he was almost 4. But man, when he finally started talking, he literally never stopped asking how things worked. He was just so intensely curious. In fact, when he went to his first and only school, this cramped one-room schoolhouse, his teacher completely lost patience. The teacher actually labeled him mentally disabled and said he was just too slow to learn.
And that brings us to a huge turning point. Edison later said, "My mother was the making of me. She was always so true and so sure of me." When his mom heard what that teacher had said, she was absolutely furious. She marched right down there, pulled her son out of that school, and just decided to homeschool him herself. She fully believed in his brilliance. And honestly, that single act of motherly devotion changed the world. It gave him the freedom to experiment at his own pace and read the entire library. I mean, the kid literally read the dictionary.
As he got older, that hyperactive curiosity only got stronger. Picture this. By the time he's 12, Edison is out working on the local railroad, selling newspapers and candy to the commuters. But just selling snacks wasn't enough for him. He actually set up a makeshift chemistry lab right there in the train's baggage car so he could run science experiments while he worked. He even printed his own newspaper on the train. But, well, this mobile lab experiment ended pretty abruptly when he accidentally set the baggage car on fire. The train conductor was so furious he punched the young boy in the side of the head, and that blow actually compounded a severe hearing loss that Edison was already starting to suffer from.
Now, for a lot of people, that kind of severe hearing loss would have ended their ambitions right there. But Edison, he masterfully reframed it. He never looked at his deafness as a handicap. In fact, he called it his superpower. For him, it blocked out all the distracting noise of the world, eliminated pointless small talk, and forced him to focus deeply on his own thoughts. He even said that because of his partial deafness, he had no choice but to build recording instruments that were way more delicate and sensitive than the human ear.
Seriously, Edison's early life reads like an action movie. Check this out. One day at the railroad, a station master's 3-year-old son wanders right onto the tracks. Edison leaps into action and saves the toddler from a speeding train. The boy's dad was so grateful, he rewarded the teenager by teaching him how to use the telegraph, which was basically the cutting-edge internet of the time. That sparked a whole new career. Edison traveled all over the country working as an operator, constantly tinkering and improving the telegraph. Fast forward a bit, and he arrives in New York City entirely broke, secretly sleeping in the basement of a financial building. Then, a Wall Street stock ticker machine breaks down, causing a massive panic. Because Edison had been secretly tinkering with it, he knew exactly how to fix it. He saved the day, got a highly paid job, and finally had the cash to start inventing full-time. With that money in his pocket, Edison set out to completely change how the world invents things. In 1876, out in a quiet, rural part of New Jersey, he built Menlo Park. This was the world's very first industrial research lab. And let me be clear, this wasn't some quiet, dusty library. It was a massive, noisy, around-the-clock complex with a machine shop and glass-blowing sheds where workers practically lived. Edison set up a deeply modern, crazy risk quota. They were expected to churn out a minor invention every 10 days and a major, world-changing invention every 6 months. And they actually delivered. The velocity was just astonishing. In 1877, they dropped the phonograph, a machine that could record and play back sound. In 1879, the practical light bulb. By 1882, he's launching the first commercial power utility right in Lower Manhattan. And by 1890, he's deep into early motion picture cameras. But out of all these world-altering gadgets, the phonograph was the one that held a truly special place in his heart. Think about that. The man who is nearly totally deaf loved the sound recording phonograph so much, he literally called it his baby. All right, let's pause here and clear something up, because there is a very common misconception we need to talk about. The myth is that Thomas Edison invented the very first light bulb. Actually, scratch that. He didn't. The reality is that he perfected it for everyday use. Other inventors, like Britain's Joseph Swan, had patented incandescent bulbs years before Edison. The issue is that those early filaments, like Swan's carbonized paper, burned out after just 13.5 hours. Plus, the vacuums inside the glass just weren't strong enough to stop the filaments from oxidizing and snapping. So, how did Edison finally solve it? By failing thousands of times. Edison and his team at Menlo Park tested thousands upon thousands of different materials. Eventually, they built a much better vacuum pump to suck the air out of the glass, and they figured out that a filament made from carbonized bamboo was the magic ticket. This new bamboo design allowed the bulb to glow cleanly for 1,200 hours. 1,200! It was this massive breakthrough, alongside his invention of the electrical grid to actually power it, that truly lit up the world after the sun went down. Now, it's really easy to look at that success and think, wow, Edison was just a flawless genius who never made a bad call. Well, the ore milling disaster completely destroys that myth. After making a fortune on electric lighting, Edison liquidated it. All of it. He poured his money into funding a colossal, highly automated iron ore mill up in the New Jersey mountains. It went completely against all the conventional wisdom of the mining industry at the time, and it was an unmitigated disaster. He drained his profits trying to force it to work, and he almost drove himself into total bankruptcy. And yet, the way he handled those massive failures is exactly why he's a legend today. He famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." See, Edison viewed failure simply as data. Making a mistake wasn't a defeat for him. It was just a necessary step on the road to success. That incredible tolerance for failure was the true engine of his career. He didn't sit around crying over the ore million disaster. He just pivoted his laps, started developing motion pictures and the modern record industry, and made his money right back. That relentless, unstoppable drive brings us to this number, 1,093. That is the staggering amount of U.S. patents Thomas Edison held when he died in 1931. It's a record that stood for decades. He achieved that by surviving on just a few hours of sleep a night, spending almost every waking moment in the lab. It just proves that an unrivaled, lifelong work ethic was the real foundation of his genius. But what does his legacy actually look like in the physical world today? Well, check this out. Just recently, these 80-year-old nickel-iron battery cells were discovered at an off-grid hunting lodge deep in the Adirondack wilderness. Edison's factory made these specific batteries between 1924 and 1931. To test their durability back in the day, he used to literally ram them into brick walls at 15 miles per hour. He boldly claimed these things could last 100 years. And you know what? He wasn't far off. Look at the intense carbonate buildup and grime crusted onto these things. They survived decades of freezing winters. They were completely drained of power, and they were basically left for dead in an uninsulated shed for half a century. But when modern battery researchers found them, they just followed the instructions in Edison's original 1916 manual. They dumped out the old block fluid, shook them up, refilled them, and hooked them to a charger. Astonishingly, these 80-plus-year-old batteries woke right up and held a charge. Edison's visionary engineering is quite literally still working today. So, bringing this incredible narrative full circle from an underestimated, so-called addled kid to an immortal innovator, what can we actually take away from his life? It really boils down to 3 core lessons. Number 1, never be afraid to fail. Remember, failure is just a stepping stone. Number 2, stay curious and keep learning. Constantly ask questions about the world around you. And number 3, hard work turns ideas into reality. An idea or a patent is just a piece of paper until you put in the grueling hours to make it real. Which leaves us with this final provocative question. How will you apply that 10,000 ways mindset to your next big challenge? The next time you hit a total roadblock or experience a massive setback, remember the guy who looked at 10,000 failures and just saw 10,000 crossed-off options on his way to lighting up the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep experimenting and keep learning.